Yeah, first of all, thanks Jan for having me. And let's talk a little bit about like AI in supply chain. Set the state of AI, which is yeah, quite something, right? Because the state of AI is moving every day, it's changing every day. But one thing that is common is that if we look at like where we are when it comes to using AI, right? The most important part is well, the data, right? What we see with our customers, there's a lot of customers starting with AI, a lot of customers that started with AI like many, many years ago, right? But at the moment, the speed is picking up. The speed of development is picking up. The speed of change is picking up. And right now, a lot of it is driven by hype, mostly by the Gen AI hype. But there's also so many other kinds of AI that are still in widespread use and also gaining, right? They're also gaining traction, also gaining adoption. So when I say what's the state of AI, I actually don't know because, like I said, it changes like every day. So it's going to be a bit of a challenge. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you like a rough idea of like where we are and what we've seen over the years, focusing on generative AI because that's the stuff that most people think about these days, right? And we see like how gradually the mood in the industry has shifted. Like when in 2023, basically lots of people were like, okay, what is it anyway, right? Can I use it? Is it secure? What can I use it for, right? So people started doing lots of POCs, tried to gain skills, etc. But of course, the challenge there was, well, where do I start, right? Now that has passed, right? We've seen customers, and we have hundreds of thousands of customers by now actually building AI and especially Gen AI applications on our platform. Now it's more a question of like, how do I prioritize? I've started all these POCs, right? How do I keep prioritizing them? Which of them do I want to turn like into products, and which of them, well, will go nowhere, right? And also people start to think, okay, which of those use cases, which of those POCs actually scale? And what about the cost if I do scale them, right? So we start to have more conversations around the cost, the scalability, the energy efficiency as well, right? And keeping things running at scale. But still, many customers are like, okay, but where's the business value, right? And I think that's the big conversations we'll be having like within this year, but also in the next couple of years, right? Because really thinking about, okay, we have first applications in productions, we have teams that know how to do it, we know how to scale it, but what about business transformation, right? So AI is promised to transform everything, but what does it actually mean, right? And one of the challenges that we've seen is that a lot of customers started with like maybe too many POCs, and many of them started on horizontal things that are easy to gain, right? So things like adding a chatbot here, like doing some customer service automation there, some marketing automation over here, right? But a lot of that didn't generate the return yet. And I think part of the challenge is that really it was like horizontal, it wasn't deeply integrated with the data, with the domain knowledge that the customer actually had, right? And that's something that we've seen also across Amazon, right? Of which AWS, the company I work for, is a part. We've been working with AI and machine learning and other technologies in the field for more than 25 years. And one thing that we've seen is that, well, first of all, we've learned a lot about how to leverage the technology, right? But probably the biggest learning, and it still holds true, is that you need to have a fundamentally well-designed data strategy, like from, of course, data infrastructure, etc., right? But also figuring out like which data you capture, which is worth capturing, what is it worth capturing for, right? And which of the data can help you then generate ideas that really drive business value going forward. Because while everybody is thinking about like Gen AI applications, right? Like how do I pick a model, which model is the best one today, right? And which is the most efficient, whatever, right? The key thing is that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? Because you need a really solid data foundation. And that's where we've seen a lot of companies struggling. Because actually a lot of people understand that they need a solid data foundation and they need a solid data strategy. Yet if you follow surveys that analysts are doing, only like a small part of companies actually have a data strategy in place, right? And only fewer still actually work on creating that data foundation. So now, for the remainder of the time, I promised to bring a couple of use cases to make it a bit transparent, like what we've seen happening in the field, right? And we said, okay, we want to do something about like supply chain and maybe retail and maybe manufacturing. So I figured I'm gonna start with a typical like retail journey and start with one customer that I can talk about in a bit more detail, which is Amazon. So Amazon retail, marketplace, operations. I assume lots of people have orders, so they're from Amazon, so might be familiar with the overall flow. And I'm gonna walk you through different parts of that journey, from figuring out, oh, do I actually want to buy something, to getting that thing delivered to your doorstep, and how AI is being used to actually make that possible or to enhance the process as it stands right now. So typical retail journey, well, do I want to buy something, right? Very often, I actually have no idea that I want to buy something, and people try to convince me that I really do want to buy something, right? So that's advertising, of course. And then I figure out, okay, maybe I want to buy something, but what actually? What is it, right? What do I want to buy? How do I decide? How can I build confidence that this purchase is not going to break the bank and it's going to make me happy in the end once I receive my package? And of course, I'll be talking about like the remainder of the fulfillment journey and the supply chain over time. But let's start like from the top. Let's start by advertising, right? A field that has really fundamentally been changed through AI. And I mean, it's a field where also AI has been used for many, many years in terms of like personalization, for instance, right? And what we've seen with like last year, 1-2 years, is being AI being used to also generate advertising collateral, right? Like images. So assume we have like a pet food company, you want to advertise a new brand of dog food, right? So what do? Like in the past, you went out and took lots of pictures of different kinds of dogs, right? And now you can actually generate these ads, right? Because image generation models actually know quite a bit about dogs. They've seen millions and millions of dog pictures. They've also seen where dogs typically roam and sit, like city backgrounds, parks, meadows, whatever. So it's quite easy to just prompt the thing to actually generate all the images, right? And make it a lot faster. And of course, you can then also combine this, right? Because, well, you just need to come up with the right prompt, right? So you can generate ads based on which breed you want to see, like where should the dog be, like in a park, in a city, etc., right? And of course, you can personalize that information. You can take all that information that you might already have about the viewer or about the shopper and actually say, okay, this person might have a certain kind of dog. They're living in a certain city because we know the shipping address, right? And it's probably, well, it is May, so I'm going to show a picture of a dog in a park. It's springtime rather than playing around in the snow, right? So you can basically really personalize and generate images for a brand collateral that is a lot more relevant for customers, which of course promises higher click-through rates. That's something that we've seen a few customers actually do going forward. But of course, part of that story is not just achieving higher click-through rates, right, and earning more per ad that you play out, but it's also fundamentally very costly to produce these ads. And especially if you look at like smaller and medium companies, they often don't have big budgets to hire agencies to do ad collateral, etc., or ad copy. And since like Amazon Marketplace actually has a couple million different sellers on the platform, many of which are small and medium businesses. And they actually did a survey like in 2023, figuring out, okay, how can we make the ad campaigns for these smaller businesses more successful, right? And one key feedback that came out is like, it just takes too long. We don't have the budget to create ad collateral. So what they did is they went ahead and built a tool that allows to automate this process, right? We can now basically take like one of your inventory pictures, add a couple of details about how you want to present it, right? In line with your brand, etc. And it will then generate images. So for instance, instead of just taking a picture of like this shampoo or like a toaster in front of a white background, right, and then putting that on a website, you can now say, okay, here's the picture of my toaster, but I'd really like to show this like in a much more appealing setting, right? With a plate with like freshly baked toast next to it, right? Maybe a glass of orange juice and a sunlit kitchen, etc., just to make it a lot more appealing to customers. And rather than shoot these pictures yourself, you can actually generate them quite quickly. And we've seen companies using these tools actually up their sales by 55% on average, right? And the click-through rates for these ads actually going up by 40+% on average. So it actually resonates with customers. But to do this, because we wanted to talk about data, the important part is you need to have the right data. Now, in this case, it's really meant to be automated and simplified, so sellers don't have to bring a lot of data. They bring a prompt, they bring the images they have anyway. But what we bring to the table, what Amazon brings to the table, is custom-built models that understand what is important about products, right? And how products interact with the rest of the image. So if you want to say, let's say, an image of a toaster in a kitchen, you don't want the toaster like sitting on the floor, right? You want to have it like on a counter where it's visible. You actually want the toaster to be visible and not obscured by something else, right? Because it's a product ad. And all of that goes into building this kind of content. So the kind of knowledge about product catalogs and what it means to have like also ads. What does it mean to create a compelling ad? That's also embedded like in these models as well. And of course, by now we can also use the same data to create audio clips for podcasts, for radios, and you can create videos, right? Quite easily. Now, of course, moving on like to the next part, how do I select what kind of thing to buy? I look at like the product detail pages, right? And again, this creates a lot of work. So we offer like sellers and brands tools that make it easier to just create collateral for the detail pages, where you just upload a picture or actually just point to like a URL of your existing product detail page, and it will automatically extract information about the product dimensions, the kind of product, etc., and actually build collateral and fill in forms to actually make up a full detail page. So that's one part of the journey, right? To make that work, you also need to have a lot of understanding of what makes a good detail page in the first place. So what is the target output that you want to generate? But you also need to understand like what makes a typical product description, right? So you need to extract that data as well, and you know what to look for in, let's say, a product image in the data that a seller is uploading. But of course, another area where a lot of customers look at is like reviews, right? There's lots and lots of reviews that give you like real-world feedback on how a product behaves, etc. So we're now summarizing that, we're analyzing that, and presenting the data in an easier way by extracting, for instance, information about is this sentiment positive, negative, but also what does this talk about. And one area where that's like super important is fit recommendations. If you're shopping for fashion items, right, different brands have different sizes. So sometimes you buy like one size, with another brand you buy like one size up or down, right? Sometimes the fit is much more relaxed or much more tight. So you need to know that. And one thing that Amazon has done is actually build models that extract all the sizing information from the different brands, put them together, compute like sizes, let's say, like a unified sizing system, if you will, so that it's clear, like if a certain size for a certain brand will fit a certain customer or not. How do we know, right? Because the customer has ordered like certain sizes from certain brands in the past, and if they fit, they can leave a mark, or if they return the data, if they return the item, right, because it didn't fit, that's another data point. So you can take the returns data, you can take the sizing data, you can also take other customers' impressions about from the review data. If they say, okay, I liked the shirt, right, but it was a bit too tight, and you know that they ordered like a size M, right? So, well, okay, maybe that M for that brand, for that item is a bit tight. So you actually make another recommendation for another customer to buy a larger size, and you see that like on the right here. And of course, there's also product search. You can do product comparisons with things like Rufus, etc. All of which build like on the same kinds of data. It builds on product catalog, on product understanding, of understanding what makes a product, an understanding of which products work or not, right? You can see the returns data, you can see the review data and extract key items about the capabilities of the product, the use case that the customers have for these products, right? And also feed all that information into this large language model that helps then customers compare, right? Helps them pick the right products for a certain event if they want to make a present to somebody, to ask like questions, etc. Now moving on, let's talk about like the second part. What happens if you actually found something to order? You click the button. There's of course a lot happening behind the scenes. The whole warehouse and inventory management, right? Picking, packing, sorting until it goes into the final delivery. And of course, Amazon leverages AWS, the AWS cloud, to optimize the inventory management, right? So the Amazon fulfillment network has about 1,000 different buildings across the globe, right? It's a complex network where like 400 million plus different products that are always on stock are basically reshuffled around. And they're reshuffled based on demand planning, right? So how many of which product, of which item are we expecting buyers in a certain zip code, a certain Postleitzahl to buy, right, at any given point in time? And if we can anticipate that, we can ship the inventory closer to those customers, right, and balance it with something that is less in demand, right? And that's constantly happening behind the scenes, where inventory flows from one fulfillment center to another, being automated depending on the demand, depending on the current demand, the planned demand, but also on things like the expected shipping speed. So do we expect customers in a certain area to want these products really fast, really quickly, and they will pay for like the more expensive but faster shipping option? Or do we expect them to choose the slower shipping option? Then we also don't ship the inventory as far out to those expected customers, right? But we can have it in a more central location and allow for longer shipping times. And this process, like this whole capacity management, inventory management process across this large network that has been planned with AI for like, I don't know, many, many years, right? Recently, it has changed quite a bit because it also added like transformer models to the mix, which actually helped to improve the forecast as well, right? So we've seen numbers like across the US network where like the overall forecast accuracy improved by 10%. And if you pull it down to regions, it's actually improved by up to 20%. Just because the demand planning can take more and different variables into account and make better decisions about where to place the inventory, right? And then, of course, a lot of AI is actually used to drive the robotic drive units and make sure that the inventory is actually moved around and stowed and picked within the fulfillment centers as quickly as possible, right? Because there's always being optimized for different things. It's optimized for speed of delivery, right? Cost of delivery, and of course, meeting the delivery promise. If you order on Amazon, right, you see like, you will get this item by whatever, if you click the button in the next 5 hours. And actually meeting that promise is a key goal of like optimizing that entire system. And for that, you need a lot of data around the current state. You need a lot of data around the current state of an individual fulfillment center. So which inventories, which SKUs, and how many of them are placed where, because you also optimize the inventory flow within the fulfillment center to minimize the order speed, the order time. And then, of course, you also need to optimize further just to keep the robots going, to allow them time for maintenance, for recharging, et cetera, right? And you need to schedule also with the humans in mind that are picking the products off these shelves, right? So the robots bring the shelves, you see the yellow shelf in the background. And then, like typically, humans look at like what has been ordered, right? And they get told like which shelf to look at. They pick the item, place it in one of those yellow boxes, one of the yellow totes, right? And then ship it off. But of course, that can also be automated, right? So we recently introduced like a set of robot arms to also automate part of the process. Why? Because these shelves are pretty high. They're like 2.5 meters, right? Which means that if you need to pick something from one of the top shelves, you need a ladder. And of course, also for like workplace safety reasons, they have like a movable ladder. But of course, moving the ladder, climbing up, climbing down, takes time. It's more injury prone, right? So that's one task where it's better to actually invest in robotics to solve the problem, right? And make it easier for the humans. And make sure that they can still pick like from the more optimally placed rows like in that shelf, right? So of course, in order to do that, we needed lots of data. We need data around, of course, where is each product placed, right? So that's the inventory data, of course. And you also need data about what does the product actually look like, because the robot actually needs to figure out and rummage in the box and pick the right item and use computer vision to do that, right? So another data set that we constantly use is basically taking pictures. So any new inventory that arrives is being photographed and scanned so that we actually have the product information that we need. And that is used to train the robots so that they know which of these 400 million different products are they looking for, how does it look, how can they grab it, right? Because they all have different sizes and shapes. And it's also used in other places. So for instance, if products have been picked for an order, it goes to a second station, like for packing, right? So taking different items of an order, placing it into a box. But of course, the question is, which box do you take, right? You want to optimize so that you reduce the packaging waste, but you also need to produce a box that is solid enough. If you ship something like this, like glass bottles, okay, you need to have some kind of padding, you need a solid box. So how do you actually pick the right box? Well, you use AI, right? What kind of data you need? Well, we have some of the data right here, right? It says glass bottles. That helps. It actually has an image of glass bottles. So you probably need a solid packaging that has enough space, obviously, right? And how much space do you need? Well, okay, you take a picture, right? When the product arrives in the warehouse and you actually see, it's not the exact picture, but you get the idea. You see, okay, it's actually already placed in a cardboard box. So in this case, you can probably just take the box, apply a label, and just ship it off, right? Because it's safe, because that's the box it arrives in. But otherwise, in other cases, you have things like these squishy, like plastic cups, right? So you know, okay, you need a bit of padding, a bigger box to actually put them in. And how do you know? Well, you collect other data points. You have taken the picture, you know the dimensions, so you know how big the box needs to be. But you can also get data from other places, like customer reviews, for instance, right? Another data set that we can reuse again and again. And of course, customer returns data, customer service data, to figure out, okay, does this product often arrive in a damaged state? If yes, then the recommendation needs to change. The system needs to be retrained so that it makes better recommendations for this particular product, for this particular SKU, to add more padding at a more stable box, right? And of course, you can drive this a step further by also just creating custom boxes, right? You see a machine here that maybe where you can just put the inventory in, like in this little purple envelope, and it just creates like a perfectly sized envelope in the first place, right? Which just gets then handed off. And then you're further off, like handing it over to the robots, right? Which organize, again, the packaging flow to pick the optimal routes so that the packages get to the right places, right? So there's 750,000 plus robots operating across that fulfillment network, all controlled via the cloud, right? That know and understand about the state of the entire system, like the inventory flows, the routes. So because we also make predictions around like what is the traffic like between the different fulfillment and sorting centers, for instance. Is there snow on the way? Is there a storm being forecast, right? Is one of the centers being shut down because of, I don't know, power outage, whatever, right? To actually make these kind of decisions and help maintain and automate the overall flow within the system. And sometimes it's stationary robots, sometimes it's autonomous robots, like in this case, right? It really helps to meet that customer promise and optimize the overall flow of goods going forward, up until the point where stuff gets delivered and ends up at a customer. All right, I'm already running out of time. No, I ran out of time already. So let's wrap this up here. Hopefully you saw like where the data and where different kinds of data sets bring an advantage, right? Because if you just use generic AI, if you just use like generic data that this AI has been trained with, right, you will end up with generic results. But the differentiation really is in picking the right data that makes sense for your business, data that can help you drive business results, whether that's like getting more meaning out of like customer reviews, making something out of the returns data, right? And really leveraging that because that's direct customer feedback on the products, on the shipping process, etc., right? Or if you take external data sources like traffic data sets, weather data sets, etc., that help you optimize the supply chain and the network, right? That really helps you build AI and generative AI that knows your business, that knows your customers and the current state of it, and allows you to work with your data, right? And really build a data foundation that can fuel your AI applications. And that's what we're here for. That's what Amazon Web Services is here for, to actually offer you a comprehensive set of services and infrastructure, right? To build this kind of data foundation, to build your AI applications and models on top of it that is really integrated across the board and that allows for a tight degree of governance, because the more data you use, right, the more different kinds of data sets you use, the more important governance becomes, right? And that's why we invest in like a comprehensive stack to build AI solutions across the board that customers like Amazon and many, many others can actually use to really build AI that differentiates their business. With that, I say thank you. I think we don't have time for questions anymore, looking at Jan.
Thank you, Michael. First of all, please give a warm round of applause for Michael. Indeed, we don't have time for questions, unfortunately, right now, but luckily for us and for all of us here, great that so many of you turned up, Michael will be available in the partner area right outside in the foyer at the AWS stand. So in case any of you want to take it deeper or have some questions
I'll be there.
he will be able to answer, he will be happy to share that with you. So thank you once again for having us here.
Thanks, Jan.
See you.